Hola, buenos días, ¿cómo están? Yo bien. ¿Y ustedes? ¿Bien? ¿Muy bien? ¿O más o menos? En la clase de hoy, we're going to learn a very important topic. All topics are important, but this topic is particularly important. And that the topic is the simple past, or as you may know it, and it's on your books, is pretérito indefinido. O pretérito perfecto simple, like perfect, preterit, simple. You may know it as pasado simple o pretérito indefinido. For example, I went, I ate, I found. Something that happened in the past. It happened, period. This topic is particularly bothersome to some Spanish students, some people who are learning Spanish as a second language, because when you say, I found the keys, you see, sometimes we can use two different pasts for that sentence, which is the pretérito indefinido and what some may know it as imperfecto. Today, we're going to focus on the pretérito indefinido, the one that doesn't bother too much. It happened, period. First, we're going to see when we use it. Then we're going to learn how we form it. And after that, we're going to go through some examples to see how this pretérito simple, pretérito indefinido, pasado simple, happens. First, you have to remember, verbs are very important, but when you get to the level when you speak in past, for example, you no longer speak only in present, it's very important. It's like you have achieved a new step. You have go beyond the present, and that's very important. So this topic is a topic you want to master, you want to learn well. Okay. Let's start by saying this pasado simple o pretérito indefinido, it's not complicated. It's easy. See, this is our timeline, okay? This is our present. Okay, this is Pedro está en el presente. Está Pedro aquí. Y este es su presente, ¿no? Su burbuja del presente. Now, we know we're talking about a past. What type of past? Because our mind can make a lot of pasts. We have a lot to talk about the past because we know it. We know the order. We know when it happened. We have a lot of clues to talk about the past. So that's why in many languages we have more past tenses. In Spanish, there are many ways to talk about the past. In this past, it's something that happened, and it happened in period. It's a precise past. Didn't happen maybe once, maybe it happened more than once, but it's a precise number of times. So for example, this past, we can find that in the past here. It has no relation to our present. But maybe what we did it for a few times. Okay? And it's still the past. And we have the precise number of times, which makes it different, as you might see in my other video about imperfect, from the imperfect. So yes, we find that in our timeline in the precise moment in the past. It may have happened more than once, but we can see first of all, the chronological order, and we can see a precise number. Okay, so it happened, great. This past is when it happened, it's not a routine, it's not a habit you had in the past. It doesn't have a cyclic nature. When I was young, I used to eat a lot of bananas. That's a routine. We are not using the pretérito indefinido, the past simple, to express that. Why? Because it's not precise. It's a routine. It's a habit. It's a past that lasted, okay? This past doesn't last. It started, it ended. Sometimes we can even picture the start of the action and the end of the action. For example, I opened the door for him. I opened the door for him. I can see myself starting to open it and closed it. And I can say, I opened the door for him. I opened the door for him a few times. Yes? You can still see that past. It was a few times. Maybe it's not exactly precise, but I probably can count them. It's precise. It started, it ended. It doesn't matter if it happened more than once. It's precise. It happened, period. You know the start, you know the end. Now, where I'm saying, I used to open the door for him. How many times? It gets complicated, right? So when you don't have the precise answer, then you are going to use a different past. For this past, the answer is precise. It can be pictured. When I say, for example, I opened the door, it's a very simple verb. I opened the door. I opened the door. It's an action. You can picture it. But when I say, for example, I felt sad. Maybe at that time I felt sad, but it's more difficult to picture it, right? Because when you know, I felt sad when I saw him. I felt sad. Me sentí triste. It was the start of feeling sad. It's not like opening the door. But you can still see, you can still feel that I felt sad is finished. It doesn't have a cyclic nature. It wasn't a habit. It wasn't a past that lasted. It's a precise feeling. Though I can say I felt sad, but the feeling, well, probably took me for quite a while. I'm seeing it as a precise moment. Sometimes when we say this past is used for a precise moment in the past, it's very easy to say that, right? I went to Alaska in 2002. Great. We find it. We find it perfectly in our timeline. It's here. I went. But sometimes with some verbs that don't have that nature, I went, so specific that you picture it, he ruined my life, right? For example, he ruined my life. Well, probably I was ruined for a long time. I was destroyed for a long time. The hurricane destroyed my house. It's not that the hurricane destroyed my house. It's not that it was destroyed and then it's finished, so it's fixed again. Some verbs have the capacity to not let you see that precise moment. And that's why you have problems. That's why when problems arise, what you have to remember, and this is very important you remember, is that this past simple, this Preterito Indefinido, as many books, many linguists call it, it's happened in the past, it's precise, it has a beginning, it has an end, it's the negation of the present, it happened, period. It's not a routine, it's not a habit, it's not something that you could see in the past that it lasted for some time, but you cannot name the precision of it. Is that clear? Does that make it more clear? Well, now we have seen some of the uses for it, and later in my examples with some sentences, we're going to see factual examples of this past. But before we move on to that, let's see how we form it, because we're going to start from, you don't know yet anything, so we start, if you know something, that you probably are more interested in what is coming, but maybe this is a good review, and for those of you who don't know, this is a great start to learn how to form the past simple in Spanish. And the past simple, as the name says, or Preterito Indefinido, it's very easy to form, and we're going to see that. Remember that in Spanish we have 3 types of conjugations, and what we call la primera conjugación, la segunda conjugación y la tercera conjugación. Primera, segunda, tercera conjugación. La primera todos los verbos en español are going to end with one of these conjugations, okay? Todos los verbos end with either ar, or er, o ir. Ar, ir. Primera conjugación, segunda conjugación, tercera conjugación. Es muy importante que recuerdes esto, because when you are learning verbs in Spanish, that is going to be your axe. Like, that's what is going to locate you where, oh, okay, this verb is third conjugation. So that's a good start. That's a good base when you know that by heart. Primera, segunda, tercera. Primera, ar. Segunda, tercera, ir. Second thing you have to remember, in Spanish, there are verbs that are regular and verbs that are irregular. The verbs that are regular follow a pattern of conjugation. The irregular ones, within their irregularity, they follow a pattern. Sometimes we have verbs like ser or ir, to be or to go, that are very irregular in past. Okay, we're going to see that later. We have here a lot of the most common, a lot of very good practical verbs are regular in this tense, in the Preterito Indefinido. And we have the third conjugation. So we say, if it's a regular, it follows a pattern. What is that pattern? That pattern, I'm going to show you how to do it. First, we have trabajar. Trabajar, to work. Trabajar termina en ar. Entonces, es un verbo that belongs, que pertenece a la primera conjugación, to the first conjugation. How does that, like, what do we care about that? Es muy importante, porque it depends on which conjugation is this verb, trabajar, to follow the pattern. What is the pattern? Well, to conjugate a verb, because as you know in Spanish, we conjugate a verb which each person, which is a major difference from English, for example, right? That you say, I worked, you worked, he worked, they worked, and in past, they are all the same. Maybe that's why you often need the pronouns, right? Because otherwise you don't know who you're talking about, because all the pronouns use the same verb. But in Spanish, we don't have that. We have something very fun, extremely fun, and that is we conjugate in different ways for each person, or for most of them, let's say. So for example, you have yo, I, tú, usted, etc. We're going to go through this, but let's go like that. For yo is going to follow a pattern, tú is going to follow a pattern, etc. What are we going to do? We're going to delete, get rid, deshacernos de what makes this verb belong to the first conjugation. We're going to get rid of the ending. And we're going to add some specific endings to make it in the past. What are those endings? Yo, I, worked. Yo trabajé. Trabajé. Tú trabajaste. Haste. Haste. Yo trabajé. Tú trabajaste. Check this out. Usted. Usted, remember in Spanish, usted o tú, usted es formal. For your boss, from an elderly person, for somebody who deserves respect from your part. You have to respect that person, right? Usually your boss, or sometimes your grandmother, sometimes you say some people, elderly people, etc. You're going to call it usted formal. Usted, ella, she, o él. Trabajó. These three, she, he, and you formal, are going to use the same pattern. Because of that, sometimes when the context is not clear, you may want to say the pronoun, as we will see later. Trabajó, trabajó, o con acento en la o. Muy importante. Because otherwise, if you don't put the acento, if you don't put the accent mark in this, she, he, you formal, you're going to say trabajo. What does that mean? I work, not I worked. Trabajo, yo trabajo, I work in the present or something. I work at a publisher. ¿Sí? I work at a publisher. Yo trabajo. Trabajó is he worked, she worked, you formal worked. That's why it's very important that you put the O at the end, because then you know you're talking about you formal, he or she, and it's in the past. Usted trabajó, ella trabajó, él trabajó. We, nosotros trabajamos, amos. En España, for example, they say vosotros instead of ustedes. We're going to get to this in a minute. Vosotros trabajasteis. And they pronounce the S a lot more. Trabajasteis. Vosotros trabajasteis. But if you are learning Spanish for America, we don't use vosotros. In America, we don't use this pronoun, vosotros. We don't use it. What do we use? We use ustedes. It got lost. It got lost in the centuries that came after the Spaniards conquered America and did a lot of things. And one of the things that got lost was the vosotros throughout centuries of years. So we use ustedes. My suggestion for you is, well, the majority of Spanish speakers don't use vosotros if you think about all Latin America. So if you want to learn Spanish to use in America, or if you just plan to visit Spain or that, a lot of you ask me, no, you do not need vosotros because they'll understand you and you won't need it in America. Muy bien. So we use ustedes. And one of the perks of ustedes is that ustedes, you, plural, like a group of people, you guys, you, plural, they, you, plural, and they are going to use the same ending, the same conjugation, la misma conjugación, la misma exactamente. We do have they for ellas and for ellos. ¿Sí? Ellas for a group of women and ellos for a mixed group or a group of men. So you have in English they, we have ellas or ellos. You have to decide. Sometimes, unfortunately, if the group only has a woman, then you will still use ellos. But if it's all women, then you say ellas. Es muy importante. Ustedes, as I say, we use it. And in Spain, they use vosotros. Ustedes, ellas, y ellos are going to use the same conjugation. Muy bien. So what do we have now? The regular verbs. For the first conjugation, that means los verbos regulares de la primera conjugación are going to take these endings. Haste, o, amos, hasteis, aron. Otra vez, what are going to be the endings of the first conjugation for the regular verbs for the simple past? Haste, o, amos, hasteis, aron. Now you say, you can change the verb. You can put, for example, hablar, to speak, hablar. How are you going to do it to conjugate it? Well, we're going to get rid of the ending and we're going to say, yo hablé, okay? Tú hablaste, tú hablaste. Usted, ella, she o él, he, habló. Nosotros hablamos. En España dirían, vosotros hablasteis. Ustedes, ellas y ellos hablaron. So we're going to get rid of this AR and add these endings. That's for the verbs of the first conjugation. What happens with the second and third? Something beautiful. Algo hermoso. Sucede algo hermoso. Something that we should be grateful for. And what is that? That they take the same endings. So we won't learn for the simple past, for the Preterito Indefinido, we won't have to learn different endings because they take the same. Huh? What else do you want? Chocolate cake? Entonces seguimos. Comer. What is comer? Comer. Something I like a lot. To eat. Comer. Vivir. To live. What are we going to do? Get rid of the ending and add our endings. What are our endings? Y, iste, yo, imos, ieron. Y, iste, yo, imos, ieron. Yo comí, tú comiste, usted, ella, él, you, formal, she or he, comió. We, nosotros, we ate. Nosotros comimos. Vosotros comisteis. As my friend in Spain would say, vosotros comisteis. Y ustedes, ellas y ellos, ustedes, ellas y ellos, comieron, hieron. Ahora, fácil, to live, vivir. We're going to get rid of that. We already did that. And what are we going to do? Yo viví, tú viviste, vivió, vivimos. En España dirían vivisteis. Ustedes, ellos y ellas vivieron. So you're going to add these endings. What endings? Y, iste, yo, imos, isteis, hieron. So you can get rid of this verb, right? Put another verb. And as we did with hablar, to speak, we can do the same. For example, let's say, what other verb? Comer. Un verbo que termine en comer, correr, correr, to run, right? We can get rid to run, correr. We can get rid of this ER and yo corrí, tú corriste, usted, ella o él corrió, nosotros corrimos, vosotros corristeis y ustedes, ellos y ellas corrieron. And the same for the vivir, for other verbs, regular verbs that end with ir. If you want to have a list for regular verbs in past, you may want to watch my video about all the regular verbs in past, so you know that a lot of them, many of them follow this pattern. What do you have to remember? What you have to keep? Okay, you have to keep the endings. You have to memorize the endings. So you have to memorize the endings. For example, let me erase the verbs. And we're going to have ar, ir. And what are we going to memorize? Are, we're going to memorize. For are, para los verbos que terminan are, we're going to remember con acento, haste, o con acento, amos. If you want to spell hasteis, aron. Otra vez, haste, o, amos, aron. Haste, o, amos, aron. Y, iste, yo, imos, hieron. Y, iste, yo, imos, hieron. Muy bien. You have to make make a little table, with these endings and try to find the regular verbs and conjugate this and write them. Okay? Write in a paper, say, okay, I'm going to conjugate hablar in past simple. Hablé, yo hablé, ¿sí? Always with your yo hablé, tú hablaste, usted habló, ella habló, él habló, nosotros hablamos, ustedes hablaron, ellas hablaron, ellos hablaron. And repetition. No? You're going to make your verbs and say, okay, to talk about the past, the pretérito indefinido, or as you know it in English, the past simple. See? We're going to add these endings. We're going to talk about the past, the precise past that we find in our timeline. It started, it ended, it was precise, though it could be repeated. We have precise answers for that past. It happened, period. Muy bien. Now, we're going to move on to some sentences so you can picture that, what we just saw, in the real world, with real sentences, with things that we want to say. So stay with me and let's go to the next part with the sentences. Ahora, let's go to some examples from the real life. Stop about how to conjugate and I and you and they and all that, and let's go to real life examples and see how we use this tense. What do you think? ¿Qué te parece? Muy bien. Well, I wrote here first a little paragraph and then some sentences. Este párrafo y estas oraciones. And the first one, it's a fun one because think of this past as a detective. You know, a detective is asking you, maybe there was a homicide somewhere and he's asking you, what did you do last Sunday, Mr. Martinez? What did you do? And then you have to remember really chronologically in order what you did last Sunday. Not every Sunday, not the Sundays in your childhood, not normal Sundays, but last Sunday, precise time. So think about this pretérito indefinido or past simple as this, perdón por el ruido, as these, let's say, like steps, things that go chronologically and they just keep advancing, but then you did one first, then you did the other second, third, like that. Think about that. That's how kids draw clouds, right? So think about a cloud that just doesn't end. It's like an infinite cloud. The ocean, right? Like the wave. One wave, two waves, three waves. Why am I saying this? Well, Mr. Martinez, ¿no? The detective asked Mr. Martinez, ¿qué hizo usted, señor Martínez, el domingo pasado, last Sunday? You say, and he said, me levanté, I got up, me levanté, me bañé, I took a shower, me bañé, desayuné, I had breakfast, but as in Spanish, you would say, I breakfasted. I breakfasted. I had breakfast, desayuné. I drove, manejé, I drove. I arrived to work. I got to work. I arrived to work. Llegué al trabajo. I greeted everybody. And I greeted everybody. You can say, y saludé a todos. And I greeted everybody. Y saludé a todos. So Mr. Martinez, he is remembering. It's very important because otherwise, if he doesn't tell in order what he did in that precise time, he might get in trouble. So he better remember it in the chronological time. And he is using the Preterito Indefinido because it's a precise past. It happened. And every action had a start and a finish. It started and it finished. We can picture it. See? I can picture Mr. Martinez cuando él se levantó, cuando se bañó, took a shower, cuando desayunó, cuando manejó, cuando llegó al trabajo y cuando saludó a todos, right? Mr. Martinez said, I woke up, I took a shower, I had breakfast, I drove, I arrived to work, and I greeted everybody. And this Preterito Indefinido, it's so precise. As I said, you can picture it when it started and when it finished. So there are some things that might confuse us, and we're going to go to those in a minute. Oh, I didn't read. Mr. Martinez kept giving details. Wow, he has a very good memory. Tiene buena memoria, ¿no? Porque ¿qué hice el domingo pasado? I don't know. Regresé a la casa. I came back home. I returned home. He said, I returned home. I had dinner, cené, or I dinnered, as we would say in Spanish. I dinnered, and I fell asleep. Y me dormí. ¿Sí? Y me dormí. So, he is taking us to the script of his life last Sunday. All the actions he did. All the actions had a beginning, had an end. They happened, period. Not too much talk about it. They are precise actions in precise times. We can frame them. See? Muy bien. I returned home, I had breakfast, I fell asleep. Now, you might encounter these things. Boom, boom, boom. See? Me. And those are because it's like I got up myself, I took a shower myself, I fell asleep myself. Those, we're going to use these pronouns. You may want to watch my video about reflexive verbs, pronominal verbs, reflexive verbs, and it's the verbs that had to do with you. So it's like the action reflects on you. You do it to yourself, or he does it to himself. But you might want to watch my video about that. In this case, there's not much information because levantar is yo me levanté, ¿sí? Yo me bañé, etc. Now, let's go to the next example. Sergio lavó su ropa. My nephew, Sergio, lavó su ropa. My sister told me, Sergio lavó su ropa. And I was like, no. Lavó su ropa. She didn't give me an exact time. But it's something that happened. That if I see it in the timeline that I told you about, right? For this pretérito. Estoy con mi hermana aquí y este es mi presente. Y aquí, Sergio lavó su ropa. Sergio washed his clothes. Sergio lavó su ropa. And I was like, what? Sergio lavó su ropa. He washed his clothes. And it's something specific. Maybe she's not telling me yesterday or the day before yesterday or last Sunday. But I can see that action that happened. It had a beginning, it had an end, right? My sister could have said, Sergio lavó su ropa 3 veces. Well, lavó su ropa 3 veces, and we have here 3 times, right? They are the past. But it's not a habit, it's not a routine, it's not something that for a while was done often, right? How many times did he wash his clothes? For this pretérito indefinido, for this pasado simple, for this past simple, we have a specific answer. We frame it in a specific number of times. Maybe we had an idea of the date. So it could be repeated, right? And it's one of the things you get confused about. Like, no. This past cannot be repeated. It can be repeated, yes. It's just that you have a precise number of times. ¿Sí? Por ejemplo, you can say, yesterday, ayer, Sergio lavó su ropa 3 veces. And you have this, as I told you, so specific picture of the action. ¿Sí? Sergio lavó su ropa, in the past, finished, it happened. He washed it. Nada. Ahora, Juanita perdió su libro. Juanita lost her book. Juanita perdió su libro. Bueno, el domingo en la noche. Sunday night. El domingo en la noche, Juanita perdió su libro. It wasn't a routine. She didn't lose it on a regular basis. She didn't lose it when she was young, when she was a child, when something, it's just you're telling a fact. Juanita, she lost her book. El domingo en la noche, Juanita perdió su libro. You can use a time marker, but you don't have to. If the action happened, if you can see the action that happened, it started, it finished, it was in the past. You may want to ask me, why wouldn't you say perdía su libro? Well, first of all, that's a different preterito. That's a different past. A different past that we're going to talk about the imperfecto. And one of the most important differences is perdía is kind of on a regular basis, an X number of times, often. It was a routine, it was a habit, it was a bad habit. It used to happen when she was a child. See? It's a routine, a habit. This is not. This is a one-time action, lost once in the past. ¿Sí? Perdió su libro. It's a fact. Same. Juanita abrió la puerta. Abrió la puerta, so Mr. Martínez could enter, para que el señor Martínez entrara. ¿Sí? Abrió la puerta. You picture it is in the past. It happened. You can say, el año pasado, Juanita, me acuerdo, I remember, Juanita abrió la puerta. So Mr. Martínez could enter, para que entrara el señor Ramírez. But it's an action that happened in the past. It happened once. See? You can picture it. It had a beginning, it had an end, right? You can even, if you want to say the script of the scene. Abrió la puerta, saludó a Mr. Martínez, greeted Mr. Martínez, le ofreció café, she offered him coffee, right? And all these one-time thing that just kept happening. See, with like our cloud. See? Ahora, there are some uses, and that's when we get into trouble. For example, like, oh, I don't know which past to use. There are some uses that are confusing because of the very nature of the verb. As I told you in the beginning, like, me sentí triste. I felt sad. At that moment, I felt sad. That past, el pretérito indefinido, for some reason, sometimes with some verbs, it's kind of the negation of the present. ¿Sí? Me sentí triste. Later, think about it. A second later, I didn't feel sad anymore. It happened. So if you can ask that answer to the question, a second later, did you feel sad? Well, no. At that action, I felt sad. It's like I have this cloud, right? Me sentí triste. And then later, the next thing that happened, me sentí triste? No. So then you're going to use the pretérito simple, the pretérito indefinido, right? It's just, though really, to feel, you probably cannot feel something and then stop. Even if you cut yourself, then the pain stays there, right? But you're going to express that action in a precise frame, right? So you can ask yourself when you are in doubt, right? A bit later, did you feel it? No, it happened. It happened here. So then you're going to use the pretérito simple. Now, for example, you can say, I was sad. Estuve triste. I was sad. Estuve triste. For some reason, I was sad. It's kind of like, I'm not sad. I was sad at the moment, as I told you here. I was sad. In this instance, estuve triste. Estuve triste ese día, during the day. Estuve triste. But if you want to say only one action, right? Estuve triste. That means estuve triste because you're not using estaba as imperfecto. Estuve, the indefinido, the past simple. It makes it like later I wasn't. Now I'm not. It's like the negation of what happened is far. It happened. Though estaba triste, as I said, like me sentí triste, you keep on feeling it, right? But as an action, grammatically as an action, it just stays in this one step. See? For example, you can say, tuve gripa. I had a flu. Tuve gripa. You can say tuve o tenía gripa, ¿no? Flu, cold. I had a cold. Tuve gripa. The same. You frame it. Tuve gripa. Ese fin de semana no salí. Tuve gripa. You had a cold in one instance in the past, right? Maybe you can again, you picture it, you feel it, it started, it ended. You are not talking about describing a situation. For describing a situation, you would use the imperfecto, as you will see it on my other video. You would use a different tense. Why? Because you're describing everything, all the atmosphere around you, having a cold, right? Oh, I felt like having a soup. See, but this is not the past of your dreams, of describing something. This is the dry past, the one that it happened and period. Often, writers, for example, won't use this type of past because it's dry. It doesn't let your imagination, this past doesn't really last. So it doesn't let your imagination flow. So a lot of writers don't use this past a lot. But we, in our regular life, we use it a lot because it's the past that happened, period. And we are full of actions. All the things you did yesterday, the more things you are, the more active you were, right? And if you're telling me, if you're listing, you're going to tell it, you're going to say it to me in the past simple, in the preterito simple. Now, if you're going to get more creative and you're going to describe the scene, it was raining, it was dark, I felt as if, when you are describing the dream, your imagination, then you may want to go and ask other more rich pasts. Maybe not the simple past because it's too simple, it's too finished. It doesn't last. Muy bien? Well, I hope these examples made this complex topic in Spanish a little bit easier for you. And if you need to practice, you may want to watch my other videos about comparisons between this Preterito Indefinido, past simple, and the Preterito Imperfecto, the imperfect past, or the perfect past. Yes? Don't worry. You don't have to worry because it's not that complicated. Amongst all the nuances and complexities of each, there is always a pattern. And sometimes when you're reading a book and you're analyzing, why did they use this past, right? Because they could have used it, it was only a one instance, right? But why did he decide to use the past that lasts, the imperfecto, let's say? Why didn't the writer decide to use this past? Sometimes it's about perspective, right? Sometimes you might even want to say the other past to make that action last. For example, I was reading this book yesterday and I was like, oh, it's interesting. He's telling me, the writer is telling me something. It was describing a scene step by step. And at some point it stopped and said, I put my hand in the pocket and I caressed my marker. He had a marker, right? And then he said acariciaba. Though I can acariciaba, like I caressed it. Acariciaba. Acariciaba. Acariciaba mi plumón. It's like, why didn't he say acarició? Because he just did it, right? He acarició, and at some point he moved to the next action. Obviously, he wasn't. You know why he did it? He did it because he wanted the reader to take him into that action with him, an action that lasted, to the very feeling of touching the marker a few times that would remind him of somebody, right? So, didn't put acarició because that would be too fast. It started, it finished. There is not a lot of imagination about it. Muy bien. Well, I hope this strange memory that I shared with you doesn't make it more complicated. It was more to illustrate that sometimes it's about perspective. And if you analyze some text, well-written texts, of course, you will see like, oh, I see what they are doing. I see what the writer is doing. Muy bien. I hope you liked my lesson. I hope you learned a little bit. If you're interested in improving your Spanish more and more, watch my other videos about the comparisons with other tenses and about other tenses so you have them in your head very clear. I hope to see you very soon in my next class. Espero verte muy pronto. Muchas gracias por ver mi video. Te lo agradezco mucho. Estoy muy agradecida. I am very grateful. I hope to see you very soon. If you like my videos and would like to donate to my channel so I can keep making videos about more topics, about more complex topics that you want to master in Spanish, I'll thank you from my heart. Your donations help me make more videos and it will help you learn more Spanish. You can go to my website and subscribe to my newsletter at butterflyspanish.com. In my newsletter, I talk about different topics that would make you closer not only to the language, the Spanish language, but to the culture and to many other topics we have to talk about that are related to the Spanish communities, the Spanish language, the Spanish culture, society, everything. ¿Sí? Muchas gracias. Saludos. Que la pases muy bien y nos vemos muy pronto en menos de lo que canta un gallo. Adiós.